My name's Simon Longstaff from the Ethics Centre, and welcome to Intelligence Squared Australia's 10th anniversary. Isn't that exciting? 10 years of boosting. Yeah, I think, give us all a round of applause. There have been some people here sitting in the audience who've been here for the whole 10 years where we've been attempting to lift the quality of civic debate so it's smart, civil and fun. Let's make it fun too. Tonight, the topic is tear down the tech giants. Talk about good timing, what an accident. It couldn't have been more topical than just now. But who are the giants? Well, there are four of them: Google, Amazon, Facebook and Apple. Together they're known as GAFA. And they once were the brash young startups, the disruptors, the ones that were celebrated for rapid innovations that really did change the world. But now they're the ones who are on top. They're the rulers, the most influential companies that the world has ever seen, colonising the planet in a way that perhaps the British East India Company would only have dreamt of. Well, who's given them this power? We have, us. We buy their products, we use their services, we give them our data. So the question tonight really is, can we trust these tech giants to use this power responsibly? Now, their champions make a pretty good case. They envision a world of big data being used to cure disease, of robots that can relieve us from the worst burdens of manual labour, of information flows that can course around the world and create a universal sense of informed citizens. But then there's the argument of their critics, who see platforms for fake news, bullying and social division. They point to the evils of tax evasion and monopolisation, the wreckage of industries that collapse, the jobs that are lost, companies that some say deaden our minds and exploit personal vulnerabilities that we may not even be aware of. And if you contrast those two views of the tech giants, the question then is, do we need to rein them in, to limit their power? Now, arguing for the motion that we should tear down the tech giants, two speakers: John McDouling, a journalist covering technology and business for the Sydney Morning Herald. He's worked for the courts in New York and recently returned from a trip to Silicon Valley, seeing them up close. He's joined by Amanda Brown, formerly of the Go-Betweens and Australian rock royalty. She's a screen composer, a director, musician, and board member and ambassador of APRA AMCOS, the licensing and royalties body representing composers, music publishers and songwriters. Please welcome the team for the affirmative. Up against them, Claire Rowley, who's the senior editor at CNET Australia, which covers all things tech and digital. And just, I think it was last week, Claire was awarded the Best Technology Issues Journalist at the IT Journalism Awards. Not her first accolade, one of many. And she's joined by Alan Jones, who was very keen to point out he's not the Alan Jones you might have been expecting here. He's an angel investor who builds startups. He's an entrepreneur in residence of Blue Chili, and he works in KPMG's High Growth Ventures team. He's the founding investor of StartMate and Blackbird Ventures, and was the South Asia Product Director of Yahoo. Please welcome the team from The Negative. So we're going to hear from these four in a moment, then it's going to be your turn. Each of you will have up to a minute to ask a question or make your own mini speech, and these can be very powerful in their effect on the audience. I'll also give you the results of the poll that was done just as you were walking in. And then you'll be polled again to see how opinion has changed. Now, as you know, just so that we can make it clear on the record, we did invite each of the tech giants to participate tonight. As you heard, one of the leaders was genuinely unavailable, off doing something else. Two didn't reply. And as you heard, one said, well, only if you change the topic. And that was never going to happen. So we now move to the formal part of the debate. Would you please welcome the first speaker for the affirmative, John McDouling.
Thanks very much. It's a great honour to be here. we're here to talk about ball tampering in cricket. Is that right? No, we're actually here to talk about tearing down the tech giants, Google, Apple, Facebook, and Amazon, the four horsemen of the apocalypse. I've covered these companies for years, and increasingly I'm concerned about them. Now, I just wanted to start by reading a few quotes that I've come across lately involving a few of these companies. The first quote was in response to a question about how we should regulate them, and I quote, "The same way that you regulated the cigarette industry. Technology has addictive qualities that we need to address. Product designers are working to make these products more addictive, and we need to rein that back." Now, who do you think that made that statement? An anti-tech campaigner? Maybe some type of consumer advocate? No. It was actually the CEO of one of the biggest companies in the tech industry, Salesforce.com's Mark Benioff. The next quote, and I quote, "The thought process that went into building this app was, how do we consume as much of your time and conscious attention as possible? And that means we need to give you a little dopamine hit every once in a while. It's a social validation feedback loop because you're exploiting a vulnerability in human psychology. God only knows what it's doing to our children's brains." Who do you think said something like that? Well, that was Sean Parker, one of the earliest investors and employees in Facebook. The next quote, and I quote, "$1 million isn't cool. You know what's cool? $1 billion. That was also Sean Parker, but actually that was Justin Timberlake who depicted Parker in the Hollywood film The Social Network. That quote is entirely fictional, but I do think it speaks to the broader issue we're dealing with here. The point I'm trying to make is that these concerns about the big four tech companies are not a fringe issue anymore. They're not sour grapes from people like me who work in industries that have been disrupted by these companies, or in creative industries like my colleague Amanda, who will speak about some of these issues later. They're not from people with an axe to grind. These concerns are now coming from the tech industry's most powerful figures, insiders, investors. And it's not just Facebook that people are concerned about. Increasingly, people are worried about smartphones themselves. Recently, two of Apple's biggest shareholders, including a hedge fund called Janner Investment Partners, sent a letter to the company calling them to do something about it. Among the things this letter noted was that 78% of teens check their phones at least hourly. 50% of them report feeling addicted to them. And I quote from the letter, it would defy common sense to argue that this level of usage by children whose brains are still developing is not having at least some impact. Now, the average person looks at their phone 150 times a day. Think about that, 150 times a day. Think of all the times you've interrupted a conversation or vagued out during a conversation and got lost in your phone. Think of all the time you could be spending interacting with your kids or your partner instead of staring at a little screen. And I'm certainly guilty of this as well. Here's another quote, this time from Tristan Harris, a former Google executive and a design ethicist. "When we get sucked into our smartphones or distracted, we think it's an accident and our responsibility, but it's not. It's because smartphones and apps hijack our innate psychological biases and vulnerabilities. When we pull a phone out of our pocket and we're playing a slot machine to see what notifications we received, who retweeted us, and how many likes we got. These things are addictive." So, for the past 2 decades, I believe the tech companies have played one of the greatest Jedi mind tricks in history on all of us. The media is definitely to blame for this as well. Google, Apple, Facebook, and Amazon have become the most valuable and powerful companies in history. They've done this while convincing all of us that what's good for them is good for you too. And it's not true. The reality is these companies are also the most unscrupulous businesses history has ever seen. They claim to be doing good. Google's motto is "Don't be evil," when their products are addictive, harmful, and damaging to society. And what is most galling about these companies is that they don't even fulfill the most basic obligation under the social license we give them to operate, which is to pay tax. You know, they will argue that they comply with the law when it comes to taxes, but this is an ethics center event after all. And I think we will all agree that the lengths to which they go to avoid paying it raises serious ethical questions about their behavior. Yet, despite of all these concerns that I and many other people have, we deify these companies and their founders. iPhone unveilings are treated like quasi-religious events. Google, which is all-powerful and able to answer any question we have, is treated like a modern god. Amazon is praised for destroying entire industries like it's some wonderful achievement. And as the New York University professor Scott Galloway has said, Amazon can inflict serious damage on competitors just by sending out a press release. And Facebook. Facebook, where do I even start? I'm not sure if you've read the paper over the past couple of weeks, but there's been quite a few big stories on the company. It failed to protect data on 50 million users, which was harvested by Cambridge Analytica, which is a consulting firm with links to the Trump campaign and various other campaigns around the world. Now, we can argue the significance of that particular story, but the reason why it's struck such a raw nerve with people, a little bit like the ball tampering scandal we've been talking about since then, is that this was the final straw for many people. It was just the latest in a long list of examples how this company has created a monster it can't control. The Facebook platform has weaponized misinformation on an industrial scale. It has provided the foundations for an information apocalypse, where people believe their own realities and refuse to agree on basic facts. And this is seriously undermining the foundations of our democracy. Now, fake news on Facebook may or may not have affected the US election result and the Brexit vote and other elections around the world. But what's really concerning is that the company has refused, up until very recently, to admit that it was in any way to blame for this problem. And I think that speaks to a broader arrogance about the tech giants. I've covered a few industries in my time, and I can safely say that the tech giants have the biggest glass jaw out of any industry I've covered. If you criticize them, you're dismissed as a Luddite and anti-innovation. At least the big banks, telcos, and big oil companies accept what they are, which is what they are. Now, you can still be pro-innovation and pro-tech without being pro-tech giant. In fact, if you believe in competition and free markets, you should want to see these companies regulated properly, and you should want to see them tore down. It turns out that big tech is actually not that different to big tobacco, or big oil, or big auto. The difference is that eventually society and regulators had the courage to stand up to those industries. That's why I think we're at a critical juncture at the moment for mankind. The pace of technological expansion is about to explode. And throughout the history of capitalism, there have been moments, and capitalism is the best system that we've come up with so far. I'm certainly not arguing against that. But throughout its history, there have been moments where there's a technological breakthrough where power became too concentrated in the hands of the few. The Industrial Revolution and the early industrial age in the US spring to mind. Now, we're better off as a result of those eras, but society had to fight back, and fight back hard, to ensure that the benefits from those technological advances were shared by the many and not just the few. Now, in the case of Google and Facebook, their biggest asset is actually you, what they know about you, what we willfully give to them, which they can then sell to advertisers. That is yours, and now is the time to stand up and take it back. Thank you.
Claire Rowley, Senior Editor of CNET Australia.
I'll just get a selfie of us.
There's some seats at the front too if there's anybody standing up who needs one.
I'm Claire Riley. I'm a reporter at CNET, and every week I get to write about why tech matters. Why Tesla is changing the future for renewables, how Google is spending real dollars on fighting fake news, and damn it, why we should care about the NBN. Please stop asking me about it though. Every week is a really great week to care about tech, except the past week. Really inconvenient timing while I was preparing for this debate for Facebook to do all that stuff, but here we are. Believe it or not, I'm actually going to tell you tonight why you love the tech giants, why they're giving you exactly what you want, why they're a force for good, and why their problems are ours to solve. Hopefully, in 8 minutes, I will have convinced you. If not, feel free to @me, Riley Styley, #IQ2Oz. But let's start with why people hate the tech giants. I often hear phrases like, Silicon Valley is toxic, or the tech giants only care about reducing humans down to a slurry of personal data and exploitable labor which they can sluice into their capitalist profit machine. But here's the thing. We created the tech giants in our image, and we like it this way. Our demands drive their inventions, and when they bring it to market, we eat it up. You didn't want to pay for expensive hotels, so Airbnb gave you someone's home for half the price. You were sick of taxis turning up late and smelling like last night's hot sick, so Uber cut the price, let you rate the drivers, and gave you mints in the back seat. We're the ones who want the instant gratification of Amazon shipping. And Facebook, you love stalking your old high school friends on Facebook and finding out what your ex's girlfriend looks like. And yes, we all love those stupid quizzes that tell you what Hogwarts house your dog would be in if it was in Sex and the City. By the way, I am a total Hufflepuff Bichon Frise Charlotte, in case you were wondering. Yes, I'm defending Facebook because here's the thing. Facebook is nothing without us. We complain about their methods whilst knowing deep down we've always been the product. We're the ones too lazy to check our privacy settings, who want to check into our favourite cafe down to the nearest meter. We like brand pages just so we can get some discounts, and then we sign on to every single app through one Facebook account, no matter how much personal information we give out along the way. How many people in this room actually deleted Facebook over this past week? Yeah, one guy up the back. Thanks for coming. I do appreciate it. If you're angry at Facebook, as I'm sure you all were, I have news for you. You are Facebook. But let's destroy the tech giants. Sure, let's destroy these tech monsters, as John called them. But remember that you made the tech monsters. And when you go to set your creation adrift on the proverbial iceberg, or should it be a Zuckerberg, I'm not sure, look at the crude face of what you've created. That face is every selfie you have uploaded to social media, crudely stitched into the cruel visage of society. I've been reading a lot of Mary Shelley this week. We're living through a new industrial revolution, which John touched on, but unlike the revolutions of the past, we expect companies, and rightly so, we expect them to get better much faster. The industrial revolutions of the past brought us railroads and factories, but they also brought us massive pollution and abysmal working conditions. But we also saw, eventually, the necessary corrections. We introduced the 8-hour day and labour laws. Before that, we were sending 6-year-old orphans down into opium mines for 19-hour days. Robot orphans are going to do that job now. We're seeing industrial growth now, and we're seeing the necessary correction. But the giants have moved from disruption to regulation comparatively quickly. They've grown up, and they have done it much more swiftly than giants did in the past. And they are facing scrutiny in ways their contemporaries don't have to. Can you imagine if Tesla spilled 210 million gallons of oil into the ocean, like BP did with the Deepwater Horizon disaster? Say you're still not convinced, though. You still want to tear down the tech giants, you want to live off the grid, walk barefoot amongst nature with your dangerously unvaccinated and tetanus-prone feet. Fine. But society as we know it would cease to function, and we would lose some really cool things in the process. Now, I haven't always been a tech reporter. I started my career with an infinitely useful honours degree in Renaissance theatre history. Yes, ask me anything. But over the years, I've learned that tech is a powerful force for good. I've written about tech saving the Great Barrier Reef, the apps helping domestic violence survivors. I've spoken to refugees in offshore detention whose only lifeline to the outside world is their Facebook account. Some of the world's biggest problems are being solved by the FANGs. And by that I mean Facebook, Amazon, Apple, Netflix, and Google. I know even the acronym sounds evil, but stay with me. They're helping people who've been ignored for too long by society, like Microsoft, which has developed eye tracking software to help quadriplegic people use a regular sub-$1,000 laptop just by moving their eyes. Or Apple, which has actually helped blind photographers to create work using a regular iPhone. The tech giants are helping people who've never had a voice before, like Twitter, which gave regular civilians a platform for speaking out during the Arab Spring, letting people on the ground broadcast without censorship. Or YouTube, which gives young people a new way to be heard. 20 years ago, we never would have seen a young queer person of colour with their own beauty show, but now 3 million people tune in every week to watch the fabulous Patrick Star tell them how to rock a red lip. The tech giants are also helping the developing world. In India and Cambodia, Facebook is connecting uneducated rural women with jobs in the cities and lifting them out of poverty. Google and SpaceX, away from our NBN debates, are trying to deliver ubiquitous internet to the developing world, giving everyone access to information and power, because we all know that Maslow's hierarchy of needs goes safety, physical needs, Wi-Fi. Tech giants are arguably the only ones capable of doing this. They have deep pockets and can afford to take risks. or make even initially unprofitable products for people who really need them. Charity groups don't really have the money, and we can't trust governments who think in 3-year election cycles to solve our big problems of this era. We need the Elon Musks of the world to come in and do it in 100 days. As 21st century citizens of the digital world, it is our responsibility to correct and direct the tech giants that we helped create, to bring in the regulations that will help to guide smart cars, to debate the ethics of machine learning and AI, to question the technologies that we will all benefit from. We shouldn't be scared of tech, we should help to shape it. So, tear down the tech giants if you must. But before you do, you better tear down a few other things. You better tear down your Facebook account and throw out your smartphone. Be sure to stop using Google to settle dinner table arguments. And remember, you can always navigate through the CBD's ever-changing road closures with your Gregory's book of maps. Am I saying that right? Gregory's? What's that? You're going to die in a withering heap if you have to go off-grid and spell out your status updates in rocks on the forest floor. That's right, you will. So don't look upon your creation and despair. Demand more of it. Use it as a tool for good. And in the meantime, watch the brightest minds of our era tackle the world's biggest problems with tech. And yes, put a cute filter on your Hufflepuff Bichon Frise because we live in the flippin' future and it is brilliant. Thank you.
Amanda, please welcome Amanda Brown.
Google, Facebook, Apple and Amazon, the tech giants, monsters, leviathans. Google has an 88% share in search advertising. Facebook owns 77% of mobile social traffic, and Amazon has a 74% share in the ebook market. In economic terms, all are monopolies. Along with Apple, they own a multitude of tech company subsidiaries, and their reach in terms of social impact is virtually absolute. We believe these behemoth companies succeeded through pioneering research, innovation, and Silicon Valley smarts. But the ugly truth is they grew rich and powerful through dubious means: tax evasion, exploitation of creative content, abhorrent working conditions, and data mining. Silicon Valley technocrats have become the 21st century equivalent of the Gilded Age industrialists. I will focus mainly on the perspective of creators and the impact the tech giants have had on our world. There's a strong case to be made that YouTube, owned by Google, and Facebook have amassed a large percentage of their fortunes by profiting from content they've paid very little for. Facebook is currently in negotiations to license music. And cynically speaking, their motivation may be a desire to integrate music into their new virtual reality platform, Oculus. However, the fact remains that Facebook paid no royalties to artists for 14 years until now. YouTube pays the lowest fees to artists of all streaming services, but a large proportion of their content is user-generated, meaning anyone can upload any version of any song. If the artist doesn't want these to be available forever on the internet, takedown procedures must be initiated. And the takedown model is unrealistic. It's not in their interests to make it easy for artists. They have a good content ID system. Have you ever seen porn on YouTube? But they want content to be available. Why? Because it attracts advertisers, and that is their core business. If the uploader sends a counter notice, the next step is litigation in the US. And how will an individual artist go down that path? The entire process is a facade to enable safe harbour provisions absolving tech giants of any liability in regarding to hosting infringing material. They argue they're only the pipeline for content and responsibility resides with the uploader. It's a classic evasion technique, akin to the drug cartel arguing that they are not liable for the transgressions of the dealer. The small-time operator takes the fall for the bigger fish. And why does any of this matter in the grand scheme of things? It matters because music is a huge part of our culture and our lives. It matters because musicians have just as much right as anyone else to be paid for their work. It matters because creators are small businesses who have no superannuation, no sick leave, no holiday pay, and no job security. It matters because royalties and licensing from our music is our superannuation and sick pay. When Apple Music launched, they proposed paying artists the princely sum of nothing for a period of 3 months. And it wasn't until Taylor Swift pulled her music and much bad publicity ensued that Apple reneged. It set a terrible precedent for placing a value on music. The free, ad-supported platforms of Spotify and YouTube contribute to this devaluation. And as we all know from the figures, streaming royalties for artists just don't add up. In his book, Move Fast and Break Things, Jonathan Taplin writes, technological progress has no inherent moral arc, and the tech hatred of antitrust laws, privacy regulation, taxation and copyright protection is seen as the key to their future. Each day, people send 1 billion posts to Facebook, upload 12 years' worth of videos to YouTube, and 90 million photos to Instagram. The average person spends 21 hours a week online, 50 minutes a day on Facebook, with teens spending up to 9 hours interacting with digital tech each day. This is a life-shaping amount of time, and the question has to be asked, is the goal of big tech freedom or addiction? Researchers at UCLA have determined that likes stimulate reward receptors in the brain, the same part of the brain stimulated by poker machines. Reward circuitry makes you feel good. We are no brave new world. We are an enslaved new world. So what are we going to do? Government needs to acknowledge big tech monopolies are out of control, and it's in the interests of antitrust legislation to break them up. Why are monopolies bad? We only have to look at the absolute lemon of the NBN to realise that price fixing and lack of choice cripples innovation. Safe harbour legislation needs to be repurposed for a 21st century internet, not hijacked to shield tech giants from paying creators fairly for their work. We need to give citizens the right to purge their own data, and we need social media and search engine options that are ad-free, even if it means paying a bit more. Big tech has a dark side we all suspected existed, but ignored in our quest for validation on social media. We were seduced by narcissism and reassured by the echo chamber of like-minded friends, and it worked better than anyone could have imagined. But from awareness comes free will. Disconnect for a few hours. Enjoy nature. Appreciate what you have. Stop liking and start doing. Remember MySpace? Huge 1 minute and irrelevant the next. People are the fuel that powers the machinery of social media, and we have the numbers to take the right of disruption back into our own hands. Music writer Bob Lefsetz writes, You've given up your privacy and it's worse than you thought. You made intermediaries, social networks and profit-mongering whores the rulers of our country. Misinformation reigns and it's all their fault. The government should protect us, but when one party says government is bad and we need less regulation and both parties are beholden to bucks, this will never happen. It's down to you and me, folks. Wake up.
Please welcome Alan Jones.
Thank you, Amanda, and thank you, John. I'd like to thank you for your entertaining and sometimes informative contribution to a worthy topic of debate. But now I'd like to reset the scene for a moment, because the world isn't ending, the sky isn't falling. Whatever we might think of Peter Button's immigration policies or the Australian cricket team fiddling with their balls, the world is an immeasurably better place than it was before the tech giants arose to help us out of the mess of the global financial crisis. Yes, it's a little bit scary that Facebook may have influenced the creation of the world's newest rogue state, Trumpistan. And yes, I know that Apple makes smartphones and tablets so amazing that we can't not buy the next one and the next one, or as I noticed, bring one onto stage instead of notes. Certainly, most of us check our phones an average of 150 times a day. I do too. Can't even come up to lectern without mine. But you know what? I check in with my mum. I do remote tech support with my dad. I'm communicating with colleagues at work. Generally, I'm getting business done. I'm increasing my productivity. Sure, I know we all feel that little stab of middle-class guilt every time the courier from Amazon arrives. Because we know that we could have bought it from a store. You know, we remember Dimmicks and Berkelows. But in reality, this was so much cheaper and we didn't even have to pay for delivery. I feel that middle-class guilt too. So how can that be possible? Surely somebody's being exploited. Somebody's missing out. Yes, I'm ready to admit it. Somebody is missing out. You know who's missing out? The losers here are not you and I. It is instead the big, complacent, giant corporations, banks, investment companies, investment funds. Oh no, those guys. We love them, right? Those wealthy investors left standing flat-footed. Shareholders in the lumbering, complacent industries like the media industry that our tech giants have utterly disrupted. Who's going to help them out in their hour of need? Should we shed a tear for the super wealthy owners of Vivendi Universal for being able to compete with Facebook and the advertising media? Should we worry for the well-being of the Wall Street hedge funds which backed UPS and FedEx and Walmart against the threat of Amazon? Should we soften the blow for those shareholders in BlackBerry who failed to see that Apple's first touchscreen phone might not just be a flash in the hand? If you're looking for people damaged by the growth of the tech giants, don't look on Struggle Street, look on Wall Street. Because in the 20 years the tech giants have been growing, we've been creating a better world for you. Not just for the elites, but for all humanity. It's never been so good to be alive. In terms of quality of life, according to the World Health Organization, the United Nations, and The Economist magazine, 2017 was the best year on record globally for quality of life. 325,000 people gained access to electrical power for the first time in 2017. Not just every month, not just every week, but every day. 325,000 people. Every day in 2017, 2,217,000 people were lifted out of extreme poverty. Actually, the weekday number was slightly higher. Lifting people out of extreme poverty generally dips a bit during weekends and public holidays. So the tech giants are helping us make the world a better place. If they're truly in charge and the world is getting better, those things must be connected, right? From civic planning to urban transport, to education to healthcare, the tech giants are making greater progress towards a better world for all of us. Why, just last month, Google published the results of a research study. It used AI to make better predictions about what should be done to help patients admitted to hospital. The technology has the ability to predict the death of a patient 24 to 48 hours before a doctor can, which could allow time for doctors to administer life-saving procedures, potentially saving billions of dollars and millions of lives every year. It wasn't hospital administrators who achieved that breakthrough. It wasn't health department bureaucrats. It certainly wasn't the health minister. Outlier, you say? Isolated incident? Certainly not. Google's research departments alone are making enormous breakthroughs in using AI to improve the effectiveness from everything from chest x-rays to eye exams to heart scans. Google even thinks it can save 10,000 lives a year by helping emergency authorities find the current location of a 911 caller in less time. Apple is currently running the largest ever longitudinal health study using the gazillions of Apple Watches out there like this, like mine. I won't bore you with the details, but last year I had a heart problem that nearly killed me, left me in a hospital for a week. It's quite probable that a future Apple Watch may diagnose such problems and sends macho men like me along to see the cardiologist instead of ignoring their symptoms. Now, I had to dig a bit harder to find some good that Facebook had been doing. Certainly it's true, if you're near this week's latest school shooting, you can log into Facebook and let everybody know that you're still alive. That's a good thing, right? But you might not know that Mark Zuckerberg himself and his wife Priscilla Chen have committed a lazy $3 billion US over the next 10 years towards medical research. That's about $4.8 billion Australian. To put that in perspective, our own federal government's Medical Research Future Fund has so far received about the same amount. So the CEO of Facebook is spending about the same as the Australian federal government on making the world a better place. And his own money, mind you, not something from his shareholders. What have the old economy giants given us in comparison? Ladies and gentlemen, I give you Gina Reinhardt, which I know is a bit like offering you herpes simplex when what you wanted was a cure for cancer, but still, you get the point, and perhaps the disappointment. The tech giants are huge, and that's a good thing, because having made themselves huge and essentially unassailable, they are now turning their attention towards solving the remaining problems, which are much bigger and more complex, and less well-suited to elected governments to solve. One of the mistakes we keep making is believing that we can solve complex, interconnected problems in the space of a 4-year parliamentary term, or that any of the changes we make in this 4-year parliamentary term won't be reversed when that term expires and the next government takes office. We can't change that, we complain. Our politicians won't let us make those changes. So tell me again how democracy isn't the problem and that the problem is the big tech 4 companies. I'm not saying the big 4 are doing a great job of running the world just yet. We certainly haven't asked them to do that. But after only a decade, the big 4 are already doing better than representative democracy does when it comes to fixing the really big problems. Government has had since 1945 to fix poverty, since 1972 to fix pandemics, since 1976 to fix the energy production problem, and a lazy 20 or 30 years to fix climate change. I love that everybody's first response to democracy isn't working is let's have more democracy, but maybe this time that shouldn't be the approach we take. Maybe government should keep doing what they're doing, but look at outsourcing the solution to many of the bigger problems to the tech giants. The Gates Foundation is most likely to fix pandemics first. Google is most likely to fix cancer first. IBM or Google are most likely to fix healthcare and insurance. Nobody has asked Facebook or Amazon yet to do anything, just to please stop doing things. But is there something we could get them to do? Well, Amazon's global distribution inefficiency makes the UNHCR look like a Paleolithic street market. What if Amazon took over the global distribution of aid? If Facebook makes it past this awkward teenage decade, maybe they could be the underlying platform for something to replace representative democracy. This debate isn't even really about fixing tech giants, you see. It's about modern government and its inability to effectively govern and fix the big problems. In the vacuum that creates, it's natural that some new power should arise to take its place. Corporations aren't evil, they are immoral. They aren't immoral, they are amoral. We need to understand that they respond to incentives and disincentives. Tonight has all been about disincentives. I'm here to encourage us all to think about some of the incentives. At the end of the day, ask not for whom the smartphone tolls. It tolls for you and for me and for all of us, and I think that's a very good thing.
Well, that's a really fascinating idea. I mean, seriously, we'll see what people think about it in terms of having the big tech companies replace the roles of government. Well, hello, Lee. Thank you for that. Okay, so in a moment we're going to hear from you. There's microphones down in 4 locations on the floor. You'll get up to a minute to be able to ask, oh, beautiful lighting, to be able to speak for or against the motion or ask a question, and we'll be able to get further views from the panel. But let's find out, before we do, what was the view. This is the result of the poll before we heard a word. 33% undecided. 33% against. 34% for. That's the first time that's ever happened. That's amazing. Wow. Okay, so I'm really looking forward to finding out what happens now. This is going to be really interesting. So that's where we are at the moment. You've got the general picture, and it's going to be about the extent to which what you've heard so far and what you're about to hear from the floor and from the stage shapes your final decision. And I'll remind you, as Kim did, that each of you should have a little voting slip. So when it comes time to vote, if you've made up your mind, just tear it in half, for, against, or if you're still undecided, just leave it joined together. But we're not there yet. We've got a bit of time to go before we actually have the vote. So if you'd like to come up to the microphone, if you've got something you'd like to say, we'll get going with the floor debate. Now, you all know how the bell works, so if you hear this, it's time to stop, okay? You've just got to exercise a bit of self-discipline, bring yourself to a halt. Microphone 1.
Hello, my name's Alex. It seems to be a debate between whether we know what's good for us as individuals and whether all of us know what's good for us as a community. I sort of see both sides of the argument here arguing for the same thing. We're essentially saying the pyramids are great, but it's awful that they're built with slaves. Now, the pyramids are wonderful and their progression is fantastic, but also slavery is terrible. Are we really going to sacrifice this incredible progression that we have in order to benefit, in order to have that benefit from slavery? And what we really need to do is take a step backwards and go, why don't we just take a little time to figure out how we can take all the benefits of what big tech is currently doing without all the negatives that we're having upon individuals.
Okay,
it seems to me that that's something that we can all agree on in this room. So instead of saying, let's not do anything, and instead of saying, let's just let everything happen, why don't we come together and find a solution in the middle?
Okay, so that's we'll start with that. John, so the last, you got the last point, okay? There are a lot of good things that are being produced. What you're questioning are the means by which they are being done. So maybe it's not about tearing down the tech giants, it's just changing their means.
I think that's a reasonable point, but I would, in the context of your statement, your question, I would question, in this case, whether the pyramids are actually, whether all the output of the tech companies at the moment is actually as amazing as we think. There's a lot of dystopian stuff going on social media, as I tried to articulate before. The kind of damage to people's brains that a lot of these products and services are doing is probably underestimated, and the kind of societal behavioural changes that we haven't adjusted to yet are probably being discounted. Now, I'm pro-innovation. Some of the stuff that Alan articulated before, like who could be against that? The issue that I have is that there's, some of this stuff is not being taken as seriously as it should be.
And Amanda, I'll come to you in a moment on the other thing. Do you think you should distinguish between the companies? I mean, rather than lumping them all as the evil empire?
I think what we're essentially saying is that nobody's against the internet or, social media or online shopping as concepts or mobile phones as great devices to have, but what we are questioning is whether these monopolistic companies are the right ones.
Okay, let's turn the pyramid question on its head for you guys. The implication is Okay, maybe you can make the case for the value of the end product, but the means by which they're being produced are deeply questionable. And I'd just take Amanda's last point about monopolies. Claire, starting with you. I mean, you could have all these things without having a monopoly, couldn't you? And surely that's something that ought to be addressed.
Sure, and we could have Coke in the bubblers as well, which I was disappointing that tonight's topic wasn't that. But I think we do need to say, well, you can't just have all of the brilliant things without no work and without learning and stumbling along the way. Why are we willing to forgive others for making bigger mistakes and yet the tech giants are not treated in the same way? So I think that's something...
You're wanting to forgive them. Do you think there is something for which they should be forgiven? In other words, do you think there's a problem that needs to be recognised and therefore we accept?
I think that there are massive changes that are happening right now, and to say that they have been flawless in the way we have built the pyramids or built up growth or built up the fabulous things that connect our societies, you know, Twitter does have trolls, but it also allows me to meet people on the other side of the world, and I think largely speaking the benefits are outweighing those negatives. To say that it's a pyramid that's built on slavery implies that the slaves didn't want to build it, and that's, I guess, what I was trying to say, that I was, you know, we've created these behemoths ourselves, because I've talked to so many people like, Facebook is just ruining my life and I don't know how to stop it. It's within your power.
Are you suggesting that the slaves did want to build the pyramid?
Oh, they loved it. Not the actual pyramids, that was bad, yeah.
We know what's good for us.
Yeah. Okay, Alan?
I would argue that, you know, to some extent, like, it's out of people's control. It is actually out of people's control. These products are addictive. Cigarettes are addictive. We regulated cigarettes, like Facebook's not regulated. And there's some reasonable evidence to suggest that smartphones themselves...
Okay, well, a lot of people in the hall. We'll come down to microphone. What number are you? 3?
Hello?
Yeah.
Okay. So I agree with you arguing for the motion for the most part. I just think you're wrong in your conclusion. I think that I'm against...
Do you agree with his arguments, but disagree with his conclusion?
Exactly.
Right.
I'm against the motion. I don't think that they should be broken up. But at the same time, I feel like we do see that they're making the world better, but they're also doing some very nefarious things. With our data, with taxes, they have done bad things. So is pointing out all the good they've done while being apologists for all the bad that they're doing, enabling them to continue to do the bad things they do?
Okay, great question. I'll come to you, Alan. Is there you're suggesting some kind of moral economy in which all the good points cross out the negative points, is that right?
It's difficult to win a debate arguing both sides yourself. And so sometimes debate speakers will maybe, you know, polarize a little bit more than they would in a one-to-one conversation. But we need to remember about Facebook is it's still a very, very young company, and it's learning and growing as it goes. I was an early employee of Yahoo back in the day when Yahoo was still a cool company, you know, and we were in that point there. We were bigger at one point than Facebook is today, and Yahoo was disrupted by Google. I think by the time we get around to finding a way to regulate or break up these corporations, they too will have been disrupted by the next generation. I think what's most likely to happen if we do regulate and we do break them up is that actually, in the process of breaking them up, we will create new disruptors from amongst the ranks.
Microphone 3.
My name's Jeremy. I should add at this point, and it's important to say that I work for Google and I don't speak for them in any way whatsoever.
Thank you. Actually, I'm going to let you start again then, because that disclaimer shouldn't count against you in time. So,
Thank you.
Right.
I'm actually speaking to the same point as the previous speaker. But what I wanted to point out was really that we do need to provide regulation of some kind. And at the moment, the tech giants are regulated. They're a company like any other company, and they have to subscribe to the same laws as any other company. The question is, what regulation are you actually suggesting that you impose? And the danger here is the law of unintended consequences. As we're all well aware, it's very hard to write good legislation. It's even harder to write good legislation in a fast-moving area. And the danger here is that we will lose the pyramids, as the previous speaker has spoken about. We'll lose all the advantages of large companies. It's very easy from the outside to not understand just how complex what the large tech companies do is. That's my day-to-day job, and I can tell you it's mind-boggling. I'd love to provide you the statistics and give you all the details of why it is so hard, but I have to tell you that there is a degree of scale involved and required for Google to be able to provide the services that they do. So the danger is that outsiders will try and provide some sort of legislative control, and in the process, they'll break everything.
Okay, thank you. Unikata, hold that, because that's a big challenge. You're saying, oh, look, the rest of the world doesn't understand it. If you start fiddling around with regulation, you could break the whole thing. Serious point, but I'm just going to give the person at microphone 4 a go before we come to that.
Okay, my name's Tom Rowley. I found the final part of Alan's speech incredibly chilling, talking about these tech giants taking over from government. Government's not perfect, and it's got all sorts of problems. It's not as representative as it should be, but at least we have some say in what happens. Tech companies are already amassing power at the expense of democratic institutions. That means as they are more powerful, we as citizens are less powerful. I don't think we should place our faith in a handful of billionaires to act benevolently and give over parts of their fortune to charity. We need to actually regulate them, run them as probably public monopolies, and redistribute those resources according to democratic processes, not the whims of billionaires.
Okay, thank you. I'm going to come to that in a moment, so just hang on. First of all, to you. Okay, you're wanting to regulate them, tear down, end the monopolies at least. What do you say to the guy from not speaking from Google, but not speaking for Google, that you're going to blow something up?
So, look, regulating Google is going to be a very hard question that competition regulators all around the world have kind of been, or at least now grappling with, which is a welcome moment. Things like Google should not have been able to depress Yelp search results in the US, for example. Like that is an outcome that should not have been permitted. When it comes to a company like Facebook, again, it's a very difficult question for regulators in the US and around the world to answer. The Federal Trade Commission is now looking at it, but they, in hindsight, should not have been allowed to acquire 2 potential competitors, which was Instagram and WhatsApp. Like that was actually turning out to be, quite a disastrous outcome that has just cemented their dominance. To the second speaker, I absolutely agree with what he said, and I would just note that both Google and Facebook are, by definition, fundamentally undemocratic. They have a dual-class share structure, which is, I don't want to go too complicated here, but that actually cements the control of Mark Zuckerberg at Facebook and the founders of Google as well. Famously, Rupert Murdoch used this similar structure with News Corp. And the idea that we should be handing companies that are fundamentally undemocratic more power over our own democracy, I agree, is very scary.
Alan, the critique about the last part that you had to say about these companies taking over the functions of governments, it invites, I suppose, you've heard a few things. There's the Churchillian observation that democracy is the least bad form of government. It may not be great, but it's better than all the others. And that companies, by their very nature in a market, are supposed to be entirely self-interested, rather than acting for the public good in the way that you'd want in a democracy. So do you really think that with those institutional settings, you could give them the kind of opportunities you described?
No, and I hope that's not how I came across as suggesting. So I'm not suggesting that the tech companies take the place of the functions of government, but perhaps just some of the dysfunctions of government, because many of the problems that have plagued the world in the last 100 years, we're making enormous progress on right now. But some of the problems that we really have to make progress on very, very urgently, like climate change, for instance, we're making no progress on with representative democracy. I talked a little bit about how companies like IBM and Google are taking a tiny fraction of their resources to apply to solving some of the health problems that our health departments and our traditional medical researchers have been unable to make any progress on. If they can do that with a tiny fraction of their power, that's because the organization itself is very, very large indeed. If we can find the right incentives, we can make a corporation do anything. They remain regulated by the same regulations as the questioner said earlier.
Okay.
The same regulations are in place. But let's see if we can find some incentives to give them interesting new problems to solve.
Okay, now some people at the floor are going to...
I'll just throw something in there. I think the interesting question about democracy is we're coming at this from Australian perspectives, where democracy is going pretty all right, give or take some terrible people down in Canberra. But we forget that a lot of countries around the world don't operate like that. A couple of weeks ago, last week, an eye roll became the biggest news in China, and it was shared around Weibo. So social networks are the way that people share dissatisfaction with a totalitarian state. Or in the case of the Arab Spring, where Twitter is allowing people to broadcast from the ground, that's a really powerful thing. So I think that we shouldn't just assume that tech is just making our incredibly tech-savvy lives marginally better or worse. Think about the use cases in other countries.
Hi, so I will introduce myself and say that I work for a tech education company, but I'm also studying psychology. Those two are diametrically opposed at the moment, wherefore I find myself in a moral dilemma every single day. So I would like to put forward the notion that, yes, I'm for or against. However, I think that regulation comes after something else, and that is education. Because at the moment we have a power structure because the knowledge about these technologies lies within a small subset of our world community. And if we all found a way to educate ourselves in how these technologies can become better, evolve for the better of humanity, we would all lean in, therefore we would all define where they go.
Okay, thank you. That's a good point. Just before people vote, because the voting is about to start, let me just make it clear what you're voting for in terms of these definitional questions that I think it was Roger made point. If you think that the tech giants should be regulated to the point that they have their power pulled back, okay, torn down from their current position, then take that as what tear down means. It doesn't mean totally destroy, it means pull them back within the scope of power. If you think that they are better off being able to follow their own direction as they have been at the moment, then you'd be voting against the motion. That you don't want to see them become smaller or constrained, that they are generally a force for good, let them unfold. And I think to take Claire's view, let them just mature. That's effectively what you're saying. They're young, let them go to the point of maturity. Tonight we've heard from 4 wonderful speakers, and I'm going to ask you before we hear a single result, which should be coming up the steps any second, to please join with me in thanking Amanda Brown, John McDougalling, Alan Jones and Claire Rowley. Please join them. Oh, Noah, hello. The results before we had the vote were 33%, as you remember, undecided, 33 against and 34% for. So now it's undecided is down to 6%. Which is pretty good. Against the vote was 44%, and for the motion, 50%.
Oh.
So I declare the motion carried by a whisker, but thank you so much tonight for coming along, and I look forward to seeing you at the next Intelligence Squared Australia debate. I'm Simon Longstaff from the Ethics Centre. Good night.